Okay, so we have entered into the holiest place on earth. It's an incredible privilege to be here now on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. We're here to honor the month of Nisan. This is actually the day upon which the divine service began. This is the day of the dedication of the tabernacle, and the first day, really, of the resting of the Shekhinah, the divine presence on earth. So the spiritual power and magnitude of this day is overwhelming. It has just incredible significance for the Jewish people and for the whole world. So we have entered into the holiest place on earth. We're walking on the Temple Mount. We entered in on the western side. We're walking along the southern side from west to east right now. We see another number of Jews that are with us today, a group of Jewish people. And we see our police escort and our Muslim Waqf guard escorts. That is to ensure that we don't attempt to pray. Even though, of course, we are allowed to pray, but there's this fine print. The police are very concerned about incitement and unrest and Muslim sensitivity. So our goal on a trip like this to the Temple Mount is really to be seen here by God, to be as close as possible to the holiest place on earth, to show that we haven't forgotten that this place is the life's blood of our entire being, and to do as much as possible through our very presence here, make a statement that this place is precious to us, that we cherish every moment that we can be here. Again, all of our prophets tell us that this is the place wherein, again, there will be a total spiritual revolution, when all nations will come here, and once again, all people will serve Hashem together. You can see a soccer game going on here. This is quite amazing that Jewish people and all non-Moslems are not allowed to pray on the Temple Mount, because it's considered to be some sort of affront to the religious sensitivities of Islam. But if it's so holy and sacred, of course, we wonder why they allow their children to play ball here. That's another issue altogether. We're now on the southern side of the Temple Mount. This is a very large space. In fact, when we study the sources of our tradition, we study, for example, Tractate Midot, which is the blueprint of the Second Temple. We learn that this side, the southern side, is the most wide open space. And the reason for that is because the majority of the pilgrims came from this side, from the area known now as the Ophel, the area from the direction of the city of David, through the southern gates, the Kude gates. All the pilgrims came up through underground tunnels and found themselves in the outskirts, in the outer courtyard of the Holy Temple. So that, for example, this month, Nisan, we talk about Erev Pesach, we talk about the 14th of Nisan, we have literally millions of Jews coming here to bring their Passover offering. They all first assemble in this place. We're looking from the south, we're looking at the sacred area of the temple itself. So, for example, where are we now? Let's get our bearings. This is the south, and we have east, north, and west. So that what we'd be looking at from here, actually, we're looking at the Holy Temple. The front gate of the Holy Temple is somewhere this way. Women's court, going in through the front gate. And then from here, we would be seeing, actually, first of all, we have the soreg, which is a low-lying fence that is kind of like a line of demarcation that separates, until the soreg, that Gentiles can go, and also Jews that have not yet purified themselves from the impurity of death are allowed to go up to that point. Just where those children are running, right below it, there's a staircase, the lower staircase, and then where these people are walking, you see in that wall there are some pillars lying at the base of that wall, and then next to them there is some stone that's like jutting out in the wall. It's like bedrock. Some archaeologists point out that that may actually be a remnant of the original soreg, the original wall that separated. From there comes the chel and the beginning of the ascent of levels of holiness up to the sanctified courtyards. So from here, from the south, what we would actually be seeing, see under this arch, there's a smaller building. There's a blue cupola. And that smaller building, we see that smaller dome, the blue one, is approximately the location of the altar. So that what we would actually be seeing from here would be the ramp that rises up to the altar. Because if you remember, the ramp rises up from the south. Of course, we learn in the book of Exodus, there's a mitzvah, a commandment tells us that we are not allowed to, the Kohanim are not allowed to walk up to the altar on stairs. They have to walk up on a ramp. So what we would actually be seeing from here, and the ramp was, the altar was very, very large. It was 5 meters high. From here, we'd actually be seeing the rise of the ramp that goes up to the outer altar. And then, of course, the building itself, the building, Dome of the Rock, the sanctuary itself, the area of the hall, and the area of the holy and the Holy of Holies. And of course, in the Holy of Holies, the place of the Ark of the Covenant on the foundation stone, which is the very foundation, the very center of the universe. And in the holy area, the menorah and the table, the showbread, and the incense altar. And the place of the altar, the outer altar that we're talking about here, is extremely significant. That's the very place from where Adam was created. It's the very place where Avraham bound Yitzchak, where Yaakov saw in his dream the ladder. And that place is extremely, extremely important. There is a spiritual relationship between the place of the altar and the place of the foundation stone. So, you know, when we come here to be seen here by God, we try to remember these things. We try to remember what happened here and what's really happening here now on a spiritual level, because the prayers of our people and of all humanity still go through the gateway of the Holy Temple before they ascend on high. They still assemble in the foundation stone. And this is the spiritual center of all creation and the one place on earth that Hashem chose, as it were, to rest His presence. And that's why every prophet of Israel tells us that the temple will be rebuilt, and that will bring in that period of time wherein all humanity will be united without competition, without malice, without exploitation, without violence, and all people will realize that the most precious thing in the world, the only reason to live really, is to know that we are living for Hashem, attached to God in this world. That's what the Holy Temple is really all about, and it's all about humanity altogether coming to its perfection. So now we're walking along the eastern wall, and we're walking from south to north along the eastern wall, and we can notice coming up here a lot of unsightly rubble. Some of this rubble is modern building materials and even garbage. And as we keep on walking, we're going to see a huge landfill over here. And this landfill, it's been here since about the year 2000, in fact, exactly since the year 2000. It's already covered with grass and even some small trees, but it's actually the story of everything that we see here is a sordid, true tale, a horrible tale of wanton destruction and purposeful campaign to utterly demolish the evidence of the Holy Temple. You know that the Muslims for many years have been trying to destroy the evidence of the Holy Temple from the Temple Mount, but that entered into a higher gear in the year 2000 when the Temple Mount was closed for just 3 months short of 3 years, when literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of tons of remnants from the second and even from the first temple, from the subterraneous, the bowels of the Temple Mount were systematically destroyed, dumped in makeshift dumps and in garbage sites all over the city. Those things are now being sifted for some years now in a special project that's based at the foot of Mount Scopus. And many important finds from the temple era have been uncovered. But here we see a terrible site that's blocking the most important view in the world, the view to the front of the Holy Temple. We see here some modern building materials, some garbage, but also we see some Herodian stones that archaeologists tell us are actually from the time of the temple. And I'll show you over here. Let's keep on walking. In this pile, actually, we see over here a cornerstone. We see right over here the top of a column from the temple. So this is an exercise in degradation and futility, because on the one hand, the Muslims claim that there never was a temple. And then on the other hand, they also say that they didn't do any damage. But on the other hand, they leave it here for us to see. And again, it's not about the stones themselves, it's about the honor of Hashem. And this sight should make us cringe and should make us realize that we have a lot to do, because of course we believe that we're going to rebuild the temple, but this is not about the stones. And people say, what's the big deal? Why are you so upset about it? It's just stones. The temple will be rebuilt. This is a question of how sensitive we are to Hashem's honor, because this was a purposeful attack against what's holy to Israel. And if they can purposefully take that which is supposed to be the holiest thing in the world to us and literally trash it before our eyes, and we do absolutely nothing because of this fear of Muslim unrest. The government is in this stranglehold. Every government in Israel reacts to the Temple Mount like some sort of genie in the box, some sort of liability. And unfortunately, they exercise such a what they call sensitivity to the Muslims that it seems that they're completely insensitive to what it means to be a Jew in this world. And so this is a terrible stain on the state of Israel until we are able to get our act together and do something about this. So we're looking now towards the entrance to the temple, say, through the women's court, and the rise of the stairs, the 15 songs of ascent, the steps that go up from the women's court to the court of Israel. And if you could imagine that the great gates of the Hechal, the sanctuary, were open, you would see through the gates, you would see the outer altar, and behind it, the sanctuary itself. So we're actually standing facing the entrance to the temple, more or less, again. On this side of the Temple Mount, on the northern side, we're able to go much closer. And again, ascending the Temple Mount is an exact science. There are many different opinions about where one can go, but our walk today is based on many central rabbinical authorities who are undisputed masters. And for example, the great Ridbaz, Rabbi David ben Zimra, who was chief rabbi in Jerusalem many hundreds of years ago, whose responsa are universally accepted and in use to this very day, he points out in a very, very exacting responsa, he explains the custom that was in force in his day, where the finest, the most devout people of Jerusalem already had a custom of ascending to the actual platform of the Temple Mount in certain areas, where they would ascend up to the balconies and the elevations on the platform in order to get a better look of the sanctified courtyard itself. So he, in this response, he makes a very exacting kind of like a verbal map, and he explains exactly where the temple stood. So on this side, on the northern side, we're able to actually get a little bit closer without actually setting foot on the sanctified court, and we're able to look into the actual courtyard itself. And here we see in front of us again the location of the outer altar, the smaller building approximately the location of the altar. We can look to the left and see the steps that descend down to the women's court. So right there, where those arches are at the entrance, that would be the location of the ducham, the platform where the Levitical choir actually stood and accompanied the offerings with the daily song. And we're looking out now into the courtyard and the area of the courtyard, and we can imagine what was going on here a little bit later this month, 2 weeks from now, on the 14th day of Nisan, Erev Pesach, the eve of Passover, when the entire nation of Israel comes with a Passover offering, with a sheep, with a lamb. And there's a limited amount of time for all of these offerings to be processed. And over here in the northern section is the area where the offerings are actually prepared for the altar. But when it comes to something like the Passover offering, that was able to be slaughtered anywhere here in the Azara. So this area on the 14th day of Nisan was very, very busy. You had Israelites slaughtering the Passover offering, and the blood, of course, was handed from one Kohen to the other. They stood on lines, and they passed these vessels, one line of gold, one line of silver, up to the altar, and the blood of the Passover offering was dashed upon the altar, and the vessel was sent back. This area over here is the area, more or less, that would be the Beit HaMitbachayim. The Beit HaMitbachayim was the actual area in which the offerings were prepared. We learn in the Second Midot, for example, and Tamid, we study about the tables of marble and the small pillars and the hooks and the rings in the floor that facilitated the actual preparation of the korbanot here. And you know that in this area over here is where stood representatives of the entire nation of Israel called the Anshe Ma'amad, the men of the assembly, because the korban tamid, which is offered every day, is actually representative of the entire nation of Israel. It was purchased with the funds of the half shekel, and it represented the entire nation of Israel. And there were ordinary Israelites that stood present during the time of the offering of the tamid every day. These men were called the men of the assembly, and they were actually kind of like a reserve duty. They came from all over the land, and they took turns every week in the Holy Temple, so that when the tamid, the daily offering, was brought on behalf of the entire nation of Israel, they were representatives of the nation there, standing there. And while the offering was brought to the altar, these men recited verses from the first chapter of Breshit, the Genesis narrative, the creation of the 6 days. Why? It's such a beautiful example of what goes on in the Holy Temple, how everything that happens in the Holy Temple is part of the rectification of creation, and how creation itself is an ongoing process, because actually the concept of the bringing of the offerings in the Holy Temple, how does it draw us closer to God? Because it's our participation in the whole unfolding story of man's attempt to fix himself in this world. And creation is unfinished. It's an ongoing process. And so these men who represent the nation during the time that the offering is brought, they are engaged, as it were, in the recitation of the verses from the Genesis narrative, because what's going on now in the Holy Temple when the tamid is brought is part of the continuation of the very act of creation itself, and we have a portion in that. Commandment to rebuild the temple, to restore the honor of Hashem, and to bring the world to its fruition, which is what Nisan is all about. It's all up to us. And so that's really the goal of everything that we're doing in the Temple Institute. It's certainly the goal of the International Temple on Awareness Day. And it's a challenge for each and every person that's with us today and watching to take action and to become a part of the revolution that is the rebuilding of the Third Temple.
That rabbi was just an incredible experience, to be up on the Temple Mount, to hear your teaching, to really envision in my mind's eye what will transpire on that 14th day of Nisan, when we all bring the korban Pesach, the Passover offering. It's just a beautiful day. As chilling as the moon watch was, this just really warmed my heart, gives me a lot of hope. We're now going to go to Shlomo Katz, beautiful musician, for some wonderful music and wisdom.
And don't forget that you can call all throughout the broadcast 1-800-940-9124. 21 to become a sponsor of the 4th Annual International Temple Mount Awareness Day. And I'd also like to mention that later on in the broadcast, we have a very, very special treat. Yitzchak and I got to go into the Knesset. We had to get special permission. It was a very big deal. Level 5 clearance. And we got to be ushered into the office of newly elected Chaver Knesset, member of the Knesset, Moshe Feiglin, who spoke to us from the chambers of the Parliament of Israel about the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. And now, without further ado, the sweet and beautiful and moving presence of the Kohen, popular singer and songwriter Shlomo Katz.